If I want to see the world I grew up in better for my children, I need to get involved. I need to start, figuring out, okay, God, but what's this journey ahead of for us? Because fighting for my children is not negotiable anymore. And fighting for our children is every fight that we as parents don't take up and fight for our kids, they're gonna have to fight. And that's what's terrifying. I don't want my daughters having to fight against men in their locker rooms at school or playing against boys in sports. Like things like that, my daughters shouldn't have to fight for that. It should be common sense.
Hi, I'm Kristen Brunius, and this is the Overcomers Podcast. I'm so excited for you to hear the stories of incredible people overcoming trials and turning them into triumphs. From everyday moms and dads to entrepreneurs to community leaders and beyond, you'll see how everyone has a story of overcoming, and those stories are what connect us all. Let's hop right in. Welcome back to the Overcomers Podcast. So glad you are here. I'm super excited. I have Trevor DeVries with us today, and Trevor is someone who I got to know through my husband, actually. He's super active in our community and beyond, as you guys will hear in a couple minutes. So Trevor, thanks for being here. But before we get started, just want to remind you guys to click all the buttons, subscribe, follow, whatever, on all the various platforms. I don't even know how many we're on at this point. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Amazon, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I think I'm probably missing a few, but it helps to push it out to the algorithm, and it helps these stories to get out to more people. And so do us a favor and do that. And if anything in this episode touches you at all, please share with your friends, your family, especially if you're in the state of Indiana. We especially appreciate that. But having said that, Trevor, thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. When you asked me, I was kind of shocked and honored at the same time. I've listened to your podcast in the past, and I've seen and heard a lot of the really, really great stories. And I think about the Schweigers, they're good, close friends, and just such good people of faith. So when you asked me, I was kind of like, that's weird. Like, why me? I'm just a regular guy, and so truly I am humble, and thank you for having me. Appreciate it, and excited to have the conversation.
Yeah. And I also second that. The Schweigers are awesome. I should probably have her on again. She started her own podcast too, which is super cool. She's a natural, but
One of those crossover episodes like you used to have on TV back in the day, right?
we should. But yeah, what I've found is through interviewing people that everyone is just normal people. And we were kind of talking before we got on that, we forget that, the behind the scenes, that we're just all everyday people with the same struggles and the same worries or similar worries. And some of us are just maybe a little bit more in the public eye. So yeah, glad that you're here. And I can't believe you questioned coming on, because you're kind of a big deal right now.
I wouldn't go that far by any means, but
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So a couple months ago, Dave came home from work and he said, "Hey, got a text from Trevor. He has an opportunity to run for state senator. Can we spend some time praying for him as he makes that decision?" And I think for the two of us, it was such an obvious, yes, please do that. But you want to tell us a little bit about the whole road that got you to that moment of, "Oh my goodness, they want me to take on this role," because that obviously wasn't just like an overnight thing. So take us
yeah.
through that.
God loves irony so much, and it was as I sit down and one day I actually spent some time and actually started writing down like all the steps that have kind of gotten me to where I'm at today. I just can't help but just smile. I'm like, okay, I never, thought that God's intention from this would have turned into this, into that, into that. And I'm just a regular guy, like I said before, right? I'm married to my junior high sweetheart, Leah. We have 4 beautiful daughters,
Junior high?
Yeah, she dumped me a couple times in high school, so she'll probably claim high school sweethearts because of those breakups. But,
I love
I
that.
chased after her since I was in 8th grade. And I would say even that relationship with her from a young age, definitely impacted who I am today. And it's just, for me, she's been such a rock through everything. And as we kind of got into this chapter of running for state senate in District 1 here in Northwest Indiana, it wasn't a, hey, I think I should do this, right? But it was kind of people whispering into my ear and kind of speaking life over me and over our family about, hey, you should get more involved, right? You should do more things. From like a background perspective, I'm just a regular guy, right? I went to high school here locally, grew up in the church, went to college, got back from college, and started having a family, and we bought a house, and just a regular person. And when COVID kind of first hit, we kind of got to the point in our faith where we started, okay, what's going on? We started skipping church, weren't really paying attention. We did the online thing, and it just wasn't really clicking for us. And then one day we had some family that was my in-laws, Phil and Chris Vanderwall, and they were like, hey, you should come to church with us, go to a different church. And we were just kind of like, nah, we're good, we're comfortable, we're happy where we're at. And they kept pestering us. I'll say pester, but it wasn't really. It was Holy Spirit, filled. Of like, hey, yeah, just come with us. So finally we started going to church at Living Stones here in Crown Point. And that was kind of the first big step for not only just kind of getting into running for public office, but also a huge awakening really in our walk and in my faith. Growing up in the church, it's easy for us to kind of, well, we've done this forever because that's what we've done forever. Mm-hmm. Right? But then when we started going into the Living Stones, it really kind of opened my eyes to, okay, why are we, what's the point of all this, right? Am I actually seeking God's wisdom and discernment and everything we do? Or is it just, hey, we go to church from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Sundays, and then we'll see God next week Sunday? And that was really kind of where we were at. And as a young dad, I started to sit back and I was like, okay, like, this is good. Going to church is good. It makes people better. I think it helps people develop and grow. But I was like, okay, it's not just about going to heaven for me, but I'm a leader in my family. I have to be accountable to God for my wife and her walk, and then now my first child, and then our second and our third and our fourth. And I'm like, okay, that's a heavy weight. I'm like, okay, I got to get my stuff together. I got to actually walk the walk and talk the talk, because God, to much that God gives, much is expected. And so that's where I started getting more involved in our church, and in each step along that entire chapter of kind of being reborn and really surrendering my life to Christ, he has just been so faithful and so good. So every time where I sit back and I'm like, okay, you sure, God, is this really what you want us to be doing right now, or am I what's going on here, right? Because it's so easy to forget and to not remember what happened, and I grew up in Christian schools. I always say K through 13 because I did 1 year private college at a Christian college out in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. And really, we always talk about the Israelites in that 40-year window of when they just continued to forget how God got them out of Egypt. And, as a young kid, I'm always like, how silly, how can they possibly forget? But then it's like, okay, God's opened so many doors. God's been so faithful. He does so many different things on a daily basis. And then you get a couple of, gut punches, and you're like, oh no, why me? Why now? Like, God, why have you forsaken me? And it's just, as I started to, sit back and look at kind of where God has led us over these past couple of years, it's just been so clear that God's plan has been so faithful. I mean, still, I laugh because, I'm doing a lot of talking and speaking and public speaking, right? And I don't know what age, I'm trying to think what age it was, but I did speech therapy for a long time growing up. And I talked.
God's so funny.
I talked so quick. And, and I used to always get so frustrated because I would get super excited and passionate about something and try to explain what I'm thinking, how I'm feeling. And they'd be like, huh? What did you say just now? You got to slow it down, and here I am now just talking to people all the time. I'm, work in the insurance field where I sell insurance, and I literally just talk to people all day long. And it's just, it's funny how God does things like that. And as I started going to Living Stones, my wife and I started getting convicted about, okay, what we need to be doing better of, getting into our word, spending time with God, and actually, one thing that I always struggled with, because I used to be very legalistic. I used to look at the Bible and be like, okay, God says, yeah, do this, that's what I'm going to do, So like one of the first things that comes to my mind is the whole tithing. For me, it was, God wanted 10% of whatever I get, all right? And the way I always viewed it is, okay, if that's the case, then I'll give him 10% of my post-tax money. Whatever I get from the government and afterwards, like, God, you get 10% of that. And then, our church started to hit on, no, it's God wants 10% of your first fruits before the government takes everything out, before the health insurance takes it out, before Social Security is taken out. And I was like, I don't know, that seems pretty crazy to me. But then, we started feeling convicted on that. So we started to do, our full 10% of our first fruits. And God just blessed us abundantly and just continues to do things like that. I mean, there's just so many times I could think of situations where when we were obedient and listened to what God was saying and continued to walk down that path, that rather than anything else happening, God would just showed us, okay, you're doing the right thing, and continue to be faithful to us. And it's awesome to see that happen. And, as a dad now, we do our nighttime ritual with our kids where, we do brush our teeth, get them ready for bed, start doing, read a book or two. We do prayer, we sing some Bible songs. And now we're seeing the fruit of that labor. The other day I was texting my wife and, we had a daddy-daughter date on Friday at our church for the dance.
I saw that. So cute.
And I remember almost crying because we're going there. And I was like, oh, crud, we're looking at the time. I was like, we're way too early. I was like, let's go to the car wash, and because one of my daughters loves going to the car wash. My other one hates it. Absolutely, it's terrified. And my second daughter goes, it's okay. I won't be scared. Jesus will be with me.
Oh,
And
how
I
old
was
is she?
like, she turns 4 in a couple months. And, and like I was like, yes, like that's the type of proud moment that I get as a dad, where it's like, we're doing our best to raise our kids. Are me and my wife perfect? No, by no means. But to see our kids start to actually want to pray before dinner for us, or to say things like that, it just, it really warms the heart. And it's like, okay, Holy Spirit, like, we're just here to steward them. They're your children. We're here as their parents on earth. We're just stewarding them for a short period of time. So Lord, just take the control over them and just guard their hearts, their minds, and their purity. That's all we ask, and we'll do our best to keep rowing the boat. You guide the ship.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the same perspective Dave and I have always had with parenting. I don't know where I was told that when my kids were probably about your kids' age. And it gets easier but harder. Like our oldest just started driving, and I mean, that's like a whole nother ball game. It's like, okay, well, like I can't really like control a whole lot. I mean, I could see on Life 360 where she's going, right? But I can't so much. If she wanted, honestly, if she really wanted to do something behind our back, that's when it becomes really easy. But we've always taken that approach to parenting, that like, I'll hold your hand until you can walk. I'll hold your hand until you can make your own lunch. I'll show you how to do laundry. Now you do your own. And it's like this continual process of letting go. And even what you were saying about the Israelites and growing up, I also grew up in Christian school. We're also sending our kids to Christian school. And sometimes I do go back and forth on that, where I'm like, I think it's so important that they know who God is, but at the same time, I hear these transformational stories of new Christians, and I almost have like a craving for that, where I'm like, man, that would be so cool if I could say this was the moment my whole life changed forever, where for me it's been kind of like a constant growing, you know what I mean? And when you're in that constant growing, it's so easy to become like the Israelites, who just kind of, God was in their presence, and then they forgot, and then they remembered, and then they forgot. And yeah, but parenting, whew, is not easy. And you have 4 girls.
4 girls. Oldest just turned 5 in February, so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I always joke, because one of the big prayers I always say, Lord, I'm like, God, just give them the most boring testimonies. Let them just, not have to challenge or have those struggles that maybe I faced or family members face as when they were younger. I think that's kind of one of the coolest parts about God's faithfulness is seeing that generation over generation. Our church is really big on focusing on the marriage and kind of the parents and okay, how do you help your kids? And one of the things that our pastor always says, and so do our marriage pastors, is you can't give what you never got. And it's hard for when you're younger to blame your parents for things, right? And be like, well, then why didn't they do this or that? Why didn't they do it differently? And then you recall, okay, what did my grandparents do? How did they handle those situations? And it just reminds me of the more we continue to sow into our daughters, the more we're going to see them sow into our grandkids and our great grandkids. And that's where it's just such a cool situation because you're going to see that and it's going to be so awesome to see. I look at our family photos nowadays and I'm just like, man, 4 daughters, we are so blessed. And I'm so excited to see how they become women of God and how they raise great kids. And it's that constant just planting those seeds and I'm just so excited about it. And it's also coming to the realization of letting them know hey, dad messes up too. And that was one thing that we've been trying to not necessarily overdo, right? But making sure that we are clearly telling our kids, when we have a bad moment, because it is easy to have bad moments when your oldest is 5 and your youngest is just 1. And there's 4 of them and there's only 2 of you, right? And we're kind of like ships in the night crossing by each other. And then, kids start throwing a tantrum and then it's just you get meltdown. You're and start yelling at the kids. And then it's okay, wait, no, God, I ask for patience. You're getting an opportunity to be patient. Let me show this patience. Let me be better. And then repent to your kids and say, hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done it that way. I'm sorry I yelled. I'm sorry I raised my voice. Daddy had a bad moment. And I'm sorry. And I think that is been a huge thing for us and our kids is showing them we're not perfect, but it gives an opportunity because now our daughters, when they mess up, they come to us too sometimes too. I'm sorry for my attitude. My 5-year-old says that all the time, and I love that because she realized it was just an attitude for a moment, and it's not a bad day; it's just a bad moment, is what we always say.
Yeah.
And so,
I love that.
That
Not a bad day, but a bad moment. I might have to write that one down. That's good.
My wife started that, so you can give Leah the credit on that one.
Well, thank you, Leah. Yeah, and I was thinking to myself when you're describing ages 1 to 5 with 4, and then you're running for state senate on top of that, and you're working full time. So that's just bless Leah, bless her heart. Extra prayers for her. So let's take it back to so you started going to Living Stones. What about 2021?
Yeah, so 2021 is kind of when we really started going to Living Stones. And really for us, it was, we started seeing kind of this COVID pandemic and just Christians being attacked and morals and values just so rapidly decaying in society. And, I remember sitting there thinking okay, I don't believe in the COVID vaccine. I got hesitant with that type of thing, right? And I was okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't get the flu shot. I'm not going to get the COVID vaccine shot. It doesn't make any sense to me. And we started seeing people get, persecuted for situations like that. And I'm okay, what is God saying about all this? How do we handle these types of situations? And we started, the churches started doing talking about Pride months and stuff like that. And I'm okay, we shouldn't be doing that at churches or doing a urban dictionary about what all these different gender identities mean and stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. So once we started going to Living Stones and Pastor Ron have just always been such a blessing to our family and really helping convey the message of you have to be good stewards. To whatever you're given, you have to be a good steward of it. Whether it's your home, your family, your town, your community, your state, your country, you need to pray for your leaders, and you also need to help and impact your communities as well. And once we started to get to the realization of there's more people going into office that don't really care about what God says and what Scripture says about kind of the fundamental things, because in reality, politics has gotten so far off the reservation of just paving roads and paying for the police department and fire department, but it's segued into all these social activities on a consistent basis. And you're like, no, like the government shouldn't allow kitty litter boxes in high schools for kids to go to the bathroom. Like, the government shouldn't help, kids get groomed or to transition from one gender to another gender. Like, and that's kind of where we're like, okay, like, what do we do? And then
More like more morality than political.
correct. And it's like, if you don't have that foundation of, okay, what does Scripture, what does God say about it? Like, then you get into this whole ideology of like, people want to say there's a separation of church and state, right? And that's really not ever mentioned in the Constitution, right? It was a letter written from office, right, to a church denomination saying, we're not going to control your denomination and make a state-ran religion. But like time and time again, you see like George Washington's farewell address, where he talks about how people need to have a religion and morality, otherwise the republic will not stand. And you see that type of thing time and time again, where it's okay, we've shifted out of, just simple taxes and, taking care of like the homeless and other things like that. And now we're shifting to more of a social problem. And our church just was always saying like, hey, get involved, be stewards, take dominion over the realm. Because if you don't get involved, we're going to see godless people get into office. Because the whole idea of like, there's going to be a theocracy, right? So there's going to be some sort of theos. And there's so many good people that can articulate it better than me. But if we lose sight of God being that theos, we end up making ourselves the God. And then it's, okay, what feels good? And then it's just the mob power of, okay, we saw tons of protests and riots during COVID. We saw this huge movement of the LGBTQ community where all of a sudden they're coming after kids. It's okay, if we just go with whatever feels good and feels right in the moment, what's that defining line of what's too much? So our church has a really cool ministry called Public Square, led by Isaac and Barbara Carr, who really the focus is to get Christians equipped, educated, and ready to get involved. And one of the coolest things that I kind of, when I first met Dave, right, we were running for precinct committeeman in St. John at the bottom of the totem pole for Republican Party. And I said, that's good enough. Like, I have every excuse in the world why I shouldn't be running for this in the first place. And young kids, young life, got to wait, a long way ahead of me, right? There's plenty of time to do stuff like that later on. But then,
Because how old were you at this point?
This was 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. So at that point, I was 28.
But not very many 28-year-olds are like, I'm going to step into this.
Yeah, and I'm like, I just ran for precinct committeeman because I was like, okay, like, I want to just help out with our local community, and I didn't like the direction the Republican Party was going. A couple of years ago, we saw like abortion being taken off the national platform. I think that's wrong. I think that should be on the national platform, even though it's not a national issue anymore, and it's a state issue, right? Because each state decides it. It's still a national issue. Like, we have to make sure we protect the unborn. So, once I ran for the precinct committeeman, I was like, okay, I started going to all the meetings, doing all the different things. And it's been really interesting because then during that process, there was kind of two paths that we kind of talked about at our church, run for state delegate or run for precinct committeeman. And I was like, state delegate, you have to go to Indianapolis for the weekend. No. I'm not going to Indy. Like, why would I go to Indianapolis for a weekend? Like, that's too much time.
Yeah.
Little did I know that precinct committeeman would be basically, a couple hours a month minimum. This is all volunteer stuff. No one's getting paid to do any of this stuff. And it's so easy to get lost in like, okay, like, what's the point of all this? But then what was really cool is the impact that our church had when it came to the state delegates. With our church and Life Church, There was, I'm blanking on the exact number, mid 60s, low 70s, basically, between the two churches that sent delegates down to the Indiana Republican Convention. And those delegates, they're the ones that decide who our lieutenant governor is, who our state comptroller is, who our state treasurer is, who our secretary of state is. So, really impactful people that control our elections, our executive branch, and kind of the finances of Indiana. And our church and Life Church ended up getting Micah Beckwith, a pastor out of Noblesville, elected to lieutenant governor. And the exact number of delegates between our two churches was the exact number that he got elected by.
I just got chills. You
And
think you don't make a difference, and you do.
and that's such a cool, he was answering the call, and God's been using him so well to speak truth over a dark area of politics. That's where it's just like all the kitchen table conversations and talk. Most families have kicked politics out of the house. We don't want to talk about it because it's dirty, it's gross. It causes too much division. It's like, I think that's been part of the problem is we don't talk about it anymore. I think about it within my own life. And part of my testimony is I struggled with pornography for a long time. And as a young dad, I got to kick this. Got help from friends at church, and there was lots of good men that came alongside me and said, hey, I struggled with that too. Let me help you. And, there was this whole iron sharpens iron and men keeping me accountable. And that's the realization of we need people to acknowledge the things that we don't want to talk about. The best way to help with sin is to actually open it up, put some sunlight on it, and okay, when you're having a hard time, talk to us. Talk to your wife. And that type of thing that I see how politics is today is people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to have a different opinion. We'd rather have the nice conversation of, okay, what movie did you watch this weekend? Or aren't you so excited the Bears are coming to Northwest Indiana? This is exciting, And that's the type of thing people would rather talk about than politics. Because politics is not fun. There's so much division in it.
Well, and I think we've lost the ability to civilly argue. And that's what I found. So, as you know, my career is a social media, right? And I meet one version of people on social media often, and then I might meet them in real life, or I know them in real life, or I'll be on a Zoom call with them, or whatever. And I'm like, I like this version so much better than the social media version. There's so many people that I think to myself, if we could just sit across the table from each other and we could talk about the things that matter. I want to help homeless people. I want to tell people about Jesus. I want to have a good educational system. I want safe neighborhoods. I want people to have rights. I want people to make choices. I feel like majority of the things, whether we are right, left, somewhere in between or whatever, the things that really matter, most of us could stand together on. And then the things that divide us, I wish that we could civilly chit chat with each other and be able to agree to disagree. And somebody just said something to me this weekend, and they said, I always thought it was one story and two perspectives, but with the rise of social media and algorithms and stuff like that, it's actually, we're getting fed two different stories because social media will just feed the beast of whatever you want to hear. So if you're on this side and you log into Instagram or Facebook, they're going to tell you all the stuff that you want to hear to feed that little echo chamber. And then the same with the other side. And so your belief just keeps getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. And then the divide just keeps getting wider and wider. And we're not realizing that if we would just talk about it, like you were saying, we would find out that, yeah, maybe you're pro-life and pro-choice, and I'm definitely not going to stand for pro-choice, but we can still have a civil conversation, right? And it makes me so sad.
And it's what's crazy is I'm not sure what the best way I feel blessed from the perspective I grew up in the biggest age of propaganda, right? That's the reality of what I grew up in. Social media started getting heavy when I was in college type of situation, in the news. And, I think about people like President Trump, right? Who he was loved by so many people. And then said, I'm running for office. And then immediately people are attacking him, making these crazy allegations, things like, there was like a situation where like 20 years later somebody says, well, he walked into the ladies' locker room at like a Miss USA competition and said, oh, I don't worry about it, ladies. I've seen that before, and people were like, he shouldn't have done that. It's like, okay, maybe he probably shouldn't have, but you're bringing this up now 20 years later. Like if it was a big deal and you cared about it before, like bring it up then. There is this such a wide spectrum of like you said, there's kind of two different stories, right? And then it's like the only stories we hear are, got the far left, the far right, and you only hear about the top 5% over here and the top 5% over here, because those are what get the headlines. Those are what gets us divided and makes people fight and argue. I mean, I still laugh because the first day that I announced I'm running for office, I got a phone call out of the blue from some crazy person, started yelling at me and started saying like, oh, you crazy fascist, I can't believe you're a Christian running for office, and starts like cussing me out. And like the guy had an iPhone, so I saw his name, his picture, and I was like, okay, so let's use John, right? I was like, hey, John. He's like, how do you know my name? It's like, well, you called me up an iPhone, and I can see you have like, and I was like, John, I bet you we have a lot more in common than what you think. Like, I was like, I want to keep a roof over my kid's head. I want to pay my grocery bills, keep my kids fed. I want to make sure my kids get a good education. And I want to make sure my kids can grow up in a safe community. Do you disagree with that? It was like, well, and he starts yelling at me again. I'm like, John, like, do you think those are good things? He's like, oh yeah, of course. I was like, okay. So that's what I'm trying to bring. I'm trying to bring, common sense back to the forefront of like, let's have good values. Let's protect parents and their rights and keep transparency where parents can decide what happens for their children, not the government. Like, you and Dave are way better equipped to train up and raise your kids than I am. And that's so clear in today's society where we need parents that are more active in being able to actually be told like what's actually happening out there. And like one of the big tipping points for why I got involved was coming to the realization is like in Indiana, it wasn't until a couple years ago that if you use the wrong pronouns for your kid, that they could be taken away from you for child abuse.
In Indiana?
In Indiana. And that's literally in Indiana, that is literally the epitome of when I tell people that, like, they're like, that's crazy, that's insane. So through all this stuff I've been doing at church, I also took a class with a bunch of friends from church called the Who's Your Leadership Series at the Indiana Family Institute. And it's a focus on the families branch basically in Indiana. And they fought for I want to say it was 2 or 3 years, because this actually happened in Indiana. A Christian family had a child who said, Mom, Dad, I'm the other gender. You need to use my other pronouns now. Mom and Dad said, no, like, we love you. We're not gonna affirm this by any means because we know you are a boy or a girl. I can't remember the gender off the top of my head. And basically DCS took that child out of their family at 16 years old. And so Indiana Family Institute came in and started fighting the government and DCS on behalf of the family to get this resolved. And what's really sad is like that young child ended up aging out and turned 18, and then they were no longer in DCS. And from what I've been told is they're still not connected with their family. And that's the type of thing where it's like, I sit there, started getting like furious. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, are you kidding me? Like, as a dad with 4 daughters, like, that's not acceptable. Like, I'm going to speak truth over my kids if they like it or not. I'm going to speak biblical truth and what God says about them and who they are. I'm not going to just let the outside forces whisper in my daughter's ears, hey, you're a boy. You should become a boy. Or, hey, you're not worthy enough. You're not pretty enough. Like, I don't want that to ever happen for my kids. So that's, as a father's heart, I'm like, this is crazy.
Well, and even beyond like the spirituality or the morality of it, like, let's just talk scientifically. And Dave and I have always kind of held the perspective of like, if you want to do that as an adult, like, we will still treat you like a human. We will still be kind to you. We will treat you with respect and all of those things. I certainly don't feel like those who are purposely disrespectful, that doesn't help anything either. But as you were talking about that, I was thinking about two of my three kids had situations where they ended up at University of Chicago in the last couple months. And I ran into a situation with these kids, they're both 12 and up, where I could not access their medical records.
Mm-hmm.
I had to ask my children's permission through the University of Chicago to access their medical charts, because I don't know if it's a University of Chicago policy or if it's an Illinois policy or whatever it is, but in their system it's 12 and up, and their results are their property. And I was like, my 12-year-old son doesn't even know how to read this. Like, how could he make any of these decisions? Nevertheless, my 16-year-old daughter, like, maybe she could a little bit more because she's 16, but these are decisions that children are just not equipped to make, you know?
And, like, that's where, like, irony is not the right word, but, like, the saddening part is, like, realizing, like, okay, we let kids, literally kids, make these types of decisions in some parts of the country, but then, hey, you can't buy a beer or buy cigarettes until you're 21 because
Or rent a car.
Or rent a car because your brain isn't developed enough. And you just sit back and you're like, okay, like, it's like, you know, speaking out of both sides at the same time, where it's like, hey, you're not eligible to do this because you're too young. But hey, you want to get a lifelong altering surgery? Yeah, you should do that right away. And it's like, this is sad. Like, we're leading these kids astray. And like you said, if I met somebody, I'm not going to be the person that, you know, is disrespectful and calling them the other pronoun. I work at a big company, right? I've had people that have those situations, right? I just call them by their first name. You know, whatever, you know, I'm not going to use the pronouns as, hey, Kristen, you know, I'm not going to use like any sort of pronouns, because I still want to love them. I still want to show Christ's love, because
Yes.
Jesus still went to the cross for them.
Yes.
And that's the thing that gets so lost sometimes, of people, you know, I think about marriage class that my wife and I took for have taken our church, right? It's not about winning, but it's about realizing you're a team, right? And it's not about tearing your spouse down, but it's about, you know, communicating effectively, right? And making sure that we're on the same page. And that's kind of the same thing with just like people in general. Like, people don't want to be lied to. People don't want to be mistreated. And if you do mistreat them, they're going to obviously push back and be upset. And that's where we get lost in society nowadays. We just want to start pushing people from one corner to another corner. And when there's so many people that are just good, solid, kind, caring, loving people in the middle that do care. And I can understand people's perspectives when it comes to some social issues. Like, hey, we should tax people more. That way we can, you know, give more people who need help different things. I can understand that. I can also understand that the government isn't very good at using our tax dollars, you know.
You think?
And so it's like, okay, what's that push and pull and that type of thing, that what we've seen is this polarization. I mean, and I think about Charlie Kirk a lot. You know, he's a young dad who was killed, you know, young kids, and like I identified with that big time, because like me and my wife, like when we were doing this, I'm like, I could be killed. I could be shot at. People are going to hate me. I mean, the moment I started running, like I got so much hate mail on the email, phone calls, social media, Twitter, and like, people are calling me gay and that they're going to see me on Grindr. I'm going to leave my wife. And I'm just like, who are these people? You know, it's like I've gotten to the point where I just kind of laugh, and some of these just terrible things people say online. And I just kind of sit there and I'm like, you would never have the courage to say that to my face in person. But everyone wants to hide behind their keyboards and start spewing hate all the time. And
yeah, I actually had someone tell me to go Kirk myself in my comments, which
yeah.
apparently is like a, you know, slang for something now.
Yeah, and it's just, and that's the world we live in, where, you know, I came to the realization of, okay, if I want to see the world I grew up in better for my children, I need to get involved. I need to start, you know, figuring out, okay, God, but what's this journey ahead of for us? Because fighting for my children is not negotiable anymore. And fighting for our children is every fight that we as parents don't take up and fight for our kids, they're going to have to fight. And that's what's terrifying. I don't want my daughters having to fight against men in their locker rooms at school or playing against boys in sports. Like things like that, my daughters shouldn't have to fight for that. It should be common
That
sense.
was already fought.
Yeah.
You know, when we had all of those wins for women's sports, what was that in the 70s, I want
Yeah.
to say?
And that's where it's just there's so much that as we continue to go further in society, we continue to also regress on some like the basic fundamentals. And that's where like I'm at the point where it's like, okay, God, I I don't want to run for office. I don't. I'm sitting there like, God, I could do so much better if I just continue to make good money and, donate my charity, donate to my time, other areas, raise my kids, continue to focus on my marriage and my family. And I'm like, these are the golden years. My kids are super young. Like, this morning before my kids went to school and before I had to go to work, right? I'm cuddling on the couch watching TV with them. Like, I soak those moments up because I'm like, I don't know how much longer I'm going to have my daughters, wanting to cuddle me on the couch and watch TV. Like, they're not going to take a blanket once they turn 16 by any means and cuddle dad on the couch.
I mean, I'm lucky if I get a hug.
And I'm just sitting there like, all right, Lord, like, I'm willing to fight the fight and to help my kids have a better world. But like, God, like, you get to steer the ship here. We'll row, but like, I can't do this alone. And that's where it's just been, God's has been so faithful and provided so many great relationships and to so many awesome people, not even just in Northwest Indiana, but down in Indianapolis, around Indiana, even out to, around the country. I mean, even into the White House even today. Like, and that's where God has just continued to just open up doors. Because when my wife and I spent a lot of time praying about this, about, okay, God, if we're running for office, like, it's not Trevor's prideful self-ambition. Like, it has to be like, God, like, if it's not centered around you and making sure that your will is done on earth, then like, I don't want to be involved in it. Because what's the point of gaining the whole world to lose your soul? And as we started going through that, my wife did the prayer of, God, just make it so unbelievable that these are only doors that you can open up. Literally, that's what God did. I mean, each step along the way, when we first started running for office was we thought we had a direction picked out and what we thought we were supposed to be doing. And then, God started nudging us into different directions. Like, people are going to say, hey, you're a carpetbagger, right? You went from state rep running for state senate. And I'm like, okay, I was running for office. I was running to serve people. That's always been the focus. That's always been the goal. The moment I announced running for state rep, I had gotten probably 20 to 30 phone calls, emails, texts across all different platforms of social media saying, hey, don't run for state rep, run for senate. And I'm like, I don't know about that. That's you're one of 50 rather than one of 100. Like, I'm just a simple nobody. You got to pay your dues. That's kind of the way that all these normal politicians always tell you. You got to pay your dues. You got to do this and that before you can go up in the level. But I admire President Trump for going straight to the top, because you get complacent. You spend too much time in public office. You don't fight for values that matter. You just get, okay, what can I do to kind of do a little bit of push and pull and make a win today, rather than realizing, okay, what's the bigger objective here? What's the larger scale plan? And, God started opening just the craziest doors. I mean, I've had the pleasure of getting to know, like, our Lieutenant Governor, Micah Beckwith, over the past year. I mean, he texts me occasionally, I text him back, vice versa, and like, he's a super encouraging guy. And, if you would have told me I'd have his number in my phone, I would have laughed. Like, that's just crazy to me. But like, he's good friends with my pastor. And so like, my pastor and like Isaac Carr and Barbara just spoke life into me and encouraged me. And then they were like, hey, Micah, Trevor? You should get to know Trevor. And then Micah's opened up so many doors to meet great legislators across the state. People that I would never have gotten to get to know if it wasn't for, those types of doors opening. And,
weren't you just mentioned on Turning Point USA too?
Yeah, and that's, and then
so cool, right?
And that's where it's just so crazy. So then, like, I start talking to some friends at work about, hey, I think I'm gonna run for public office, And they're like, oh, sweet, let me know what we can do to help, And my good friend Anthony is like, at work, was like, hey, let me connect you with some friends. And I'm like, okay. And so then he connects me to some of like the founding partners of Turning Point. And he's like,
Come
you
on.
should get to know these guys, and they're based out of Lamont, Illinois. Turning Point's based out of Lamont, right? And actually, Turning Point's mailing address to this day is Crown Point, Indiana.
It is?
Yep, because Charlie Kirk back in the day realized that Illinois might take negative viewpoint of him in Turning Point, so he had the mail get sent to Crown Point because he didn't want it coming to Illinois because he didn't trust the United States Post Office.
Like where? Just like a P.O. box
It's
or
a
whatever?
P.O. box in Crown Point. Yeah.
That's so crazy.
I think now they're headquartered in Arizona, but they still
Yeah.
have mail sent to like the legal entity is still out of Crown Point, Indiana. And so then they start introducing me to their friends, and next thing I know, I'm talking with people from Turning Point Action, and then people from larger organizations that are just social conservation groups, and then all of a sudden get people like from Hunter Nation. We have people from the White House, and I'm just like, this is insane,
God is using you. It's so cool.
and and I just like literally, I think it was last week. So my campaign guy who's been helping out with me is just a good Christian man, Carson, and he's been helping me so much. And all of a sudden, he gets I get a text saying, "Hey, can you give us Carson's information?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure." So send Carson's information to the team at the White House, and the next thing I know, like a couple hours later, Carson calls me. He is like, "Hey, thanks for the heads up on the White House." He was like, they want a dossier about you and all your information about who you are, and they want it by tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And I'm like, this is like 4 o'clock on a Wednesday. I'm like, okay, let's get to work, let's get this done, but like the fact that like my name, or even like people like know about me or think about me, or like my name's been mentioned in the White House or at the Turning Point events. I mean, Turning Point has been helpful in just spreading the word out from good Christian values. And, I have always loved listening to Charlie Kirk because he's always been so good at speaking truth, but also in a kind, caring way and actually caring about people. And to see his shift the past couple years from being I would say like a staunch, just conservative, like shove it down your throat type of perspective, but to like, help me understand where you're coming from. And then let me try to help you understand where I'm coming from. And that's been such a huge thing, is come to the realization of like, we need to help people understand where voices are coming from and how we view things. And if we can't articulate why our basis for our beliefs from scripture also is just intersects with like the secular worldview of how things should be done, like people can't understand and they can't get behind it. And there's been such a need in America for people that just don't just defend the children and the unborn and for our liberties and our freedoms, but actually fighting for it. That's been like the biggest awakening call for everything. The way I view it with the whole like redistricting effort, right, which really kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to Indiana's State House, and the entire country looked at Indiana. Mm-hmm. And they said, Indiana, we need you to step up and do what's right and fight for conservatives and for values that Americans care about. And Indiana's state senate shot it down.
And they did it.
And it's more than just drawing congressional maps, right? It was really a thermometer that tested the water and found out how cold the Senate was from a true conservative background and perspective. I mean, when you talk about redistricting, it's not just about getting an extra seat or two in the House of Representatives, but you're fighting for America. You're fighting to protect our citizens. I mean, all politics are local politics. We talk about like the open border situation, and like this current administration with Trump has been fantastic on shutting that down and protecting our people. I mean, everyone thought I was crazy when I said we got to shut down the border. It's going to affect Northwest Indiana. And then was like 9 months later, during the Biden administration, after I started harping on this all over the place, we have a young lady, almost gets stabbed in Lowell, just south of me. And I'm just two towns south. And it's like, it's everywhere. All politics are across the board. And it's not saying that people that came over the border illegally are bad people, right? Or that they deserve to be, sequestered and put into jail and put into labor camps. No, that's not at all. But if we don't keep a proper process to get people into our country, we don't know who's here and we can't protect them. There's a reason we keep our doors locked in our house at night. It's not that, if somebody needed food and water or needed to use the bathroom, they knock on my door. I'd probably let them in, and give them something to eat and drink. But
yeah, it's not totally black and white.
yeah,
It's a product of a broken system.
yeah,
That if our system was a little bit better for people to come here legally and they wouldn't have to wait and jump through 10 years of hoops and paperwork and whatever, maybe it would be a little less enticing to jump the border, break the law, put yourself. I mean, it's a product. It's not just a black and white issue.
yeah.
But having those closed borders protects us all, right? And it's...
And then I sit back because, my parents are divorced. My stepmom's Italian, right? And she was the youngest of all of her siblings, and she was the only one born in America. All of her other siblings were born in Italy. So of the 6, 7 kids, right? She was the only one born in America, and they're the most patriotic group of people I've ever met in my entire life. They love America. They just celebrated their 60th year in America. So my Aunt Nella goes, "We need a cake." And they all have thick accents. "We need a cake, and it needs to say, 'God bless America, 60th anniversary.'" And so I'll send a picture of that cake later, but they love it, and they fought hard, and they went through the proper steps and the processes and came to America, and nothing was ever given to them. Nothing was ever given to almost every immigrant that's ever come to America.
And we're all immigrants, one way, shape, or form.
And now you look at today's, and we're seeing, the Biden administration in New York City was putting them up in the Ritz-Carlton, giving them free health care, debit cards. And it's okay, we're giving them more than what we're giving people that actually pay into the system or people that, might need it more. We're leaving our homeless veterans on the streets who can't take care of themselves because of mental or physical issues and disabilities. But we're gonna take all of these people that are just flooding our country because they're getting free stuff now. If we're not gonna steward what we have and the people we have, and currently, why are we opening the door to have more people come in? That makes no sense to me. And when it comes to social issues and social costs of doing different programs, I sit back and I'm like, okay, if we're gonna do stuff like that, let's make sure we're doing it in a proper way that is cost effective. We're make sure that we're not just throwing things around all willy-nilly. I mean, we saw the NGOs, the non-government organizations that are getting, billions of dollars from the U.S. government, and it's just a big money laundering scheme. And you just sit there okay, this is strange. What's going on? And it's, for such a long time, every aspect in America has been hey, you come to America, you work hard, you get to raise a family, you get to buy a house. That's the American dream. Maybe someday you own your own business, right? And I just sit back, I'm okay, we're seeing this American dream being squashed because we're opening the front door and telling everybody, come on in. And the people that have been here, you guys are getting put last. Americans are put last. People that came here legally are put last. My brother-in-law is, he's an immigrant here too, born and raised in China, and now he came to the U.S. for college, got his medical license. He's a doctor now. Super awesome guy. I mean, super smart. I mean, he got bored in med school and got his pilot's license. That's how cool. That's how cool Sean is. And I'm I love him. I want people like him in America, and I want people that are adding value to America to be here because those are the people that we need. But to make it so everybody comes in, we're watering down and we're not able to help provide for those that actually do need it. I mean, that's the big, push and pull that we're seeing right now. Every social issue and social service has to be funded, right? And if we're going to fund it, we can't just give everything because we're seeing this national debt going crazy. I mean, we're seeing, illegal immigrants getting government paid housing. And yet, I'm concerned my kids can't buy a house someday because the cost of houses have gotten crazy.
Yeah,
And
it's a real reality. I have nieces in their 20s, and good luck, you know.
and that's where it's just crazy that we've got to this point where, and it just, you take a step back and you're like, okay, it's all intertwined. Every aspect of life to some basis is political, but also it's spiritual. It's a spiritual attack constantly of like, you have young kids that can't get into college, that want to go to college, and because of maybe their race or their gender or their religious background, but then we're shipping in tons of people to go to like the colleges that are not from America. We're telling young kids and young families, hey, get to the back of the line. We're going to focus on other people first, and it's demoralizing that American dream. I mean, I'll be the first to say that one of the biggest reasons why I have a house today is because I bought pre-COVID, before the giant jump in the cost of living. And we got built up a ton of equity in our first house. So when we bought our second house, it was a super easy transition because we got basically 30 years of equity within 4 because we bought in 2018 and we sold in 2021.
Yeah, we actually did the same thing.
And that's the craziness of it. And it's just, I guess, it's bringing common sense back. And that's like the hardest thing is just people want to be so polarized and don't want to talk about, okay, every aspect of life. There's so many different things that come into it, and like for me, like making sure my kids and everyone's kids in our community are safe, top priority. I look at, recently Indiana had a bunch, there's so many bills that go on. There's so many different aspects of what's going on in our country and our state, and like there's 2 bills that kind of come top of mind for me that happened this past session that I thought were misses, right? They were good intentions, but they just didn't go far enough. The first one was like this anti-grooming bill where basically kids, can't be groomed for sexual activity by adults, and it was originally authored for basically to protect and make it illegal to groom kids underneath the age of 14. Okay. So you're leaving 15, 16, 17. What's going on there? Like they're not going to be protected and you're basically opening the door. And then thankfully, Representative Ireland, made the amendment to get it to 16, right? Which
Better.
I would love to see 18. And they're like, well, age of consent in Indiana is 16. So it's hard to say that, that's the case. It's like, okay, but then in Indiana, we also tell kids they can't buy cigarettes or booze until they're 21. But have a life-altering decision like, having sex and having a kid, like, go for it, or being groomed by an adult, for sexual activity. It's like, okay. And then there's like this idea. Yeah, I struggle with the ideology of like, well then, kids that are from 16, 18, there's other laws that basically say that, if it's a adult and authority over that kid, so like a high school teacher or like a coach, right? There's other laws that say like, okay, then those people can't groom them because they're in an authority perspective. But a 40-year-old who just finds a cute girl who's 16 years old at Target can hit her up and get her phone number and have sex with her.
And I have a 16-year-old, so that makes me furious.
But the reason that's allowed is because the adult who's 40 years old is not an authority over the kid. So that's why it's not considered grooming. And I grew up in the age and environment of like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, sir, no, sir, and like any adult, when you're under the age of 18, you give them respect. You call them Mr. and Mrs., you sir, ma'am, like they may not be actually over an authority of me, but like if an adult tells you to do something, like you're expected to do it. Like you're still a kid. Listen to your elders, respect your elders. Like that was ingrained at a young age. So the idea that like that can still happen is sickening. And that type of situation where it's like, in theory, great idea, great bill, but then we just totally miss the mark. It's like protect all kids under the age of 18. And then if we need to update the age of consent, which I want to say was done in like 1920s, like federally, so just like made the bar 16, then update the age of consent in Indiana. No big deal. Like, get that changed. That makes sense to me. And like, as a dad with 4 daughters, like that's a big concern. And it's stuff like that that just like riles me up and gets me angry because I'm like, Papa Bear comes out and I'm like, I want to protect my kids, protect my daughters. This is important. And then like,
I think every dad would feel that way.
yeah.
And mom.
And like, we used to have so much social justice in America. I think back to like, probably our grandparents' age, where if like a young girl got raped by an old man, right? What would happen? Every man in that town would go ahead and beat the crap out of that guy and probably do some social justice, and that man would probably end up being killed, right? And that was the environment that America used to live in. But now we live in this environment of like, well, it's not actually pedophilia, it's a map. It's a minor attracted person, and it's like, no, like they're still a pedophile, and like it's disgusting. And so it's like we moved away from like taking care of a situation like that and now letting the government decide it, and then the government leaves all these open doors and ambiguous ideologies. That way it's kind of open to whatever the courts want to decide, which the courts aren't great always. You see there's rural lawfare happening all the time where it's just like going crazy. And then the other big thing that really frustrated me was like, I think it's been like once a week we see headlines in Indiana where a illegal immigrant or somebody who doesn't speak English is driving a giant semi-truck, and they got a CDL from California and New York, and their license says yada yada, last name, first name, none given. So they didn't put their first name on the license, and then California and New York pass out like candy, like it's Halloween. And they come to Indiana, and because we take reciprocation of driver's licenses, we just go ahead and give them an Indiana CDL. And we give them CDLs left and right. And then like there was an amendment on one of the House bills that happened, and Senator Mike Young, I think it was, made an amendment that said like those that came here as refugees or asylees or are not proficient in English, right, or are not here legally, cannot get a CDL in Indiana. And that was shot down. And it's like, yeah, that was shot down. And you're just like, have any of these senators been watching the news? Like, we literally have had probably a dozen Hoosiers killed this year because truck drivers are coming into Indiana from other states, from other places of the world that have never driven in America, who get a CDL, and now they don't read English and they do something illegal, and then it kills us. And it's like, I even drive down 65 and I get nervous now because I'm like, okay, like hopefully this person can understand English and knows where they're going, and so they don't run me off the road and kill me and my family. And that type of thing where it's like we're losing sight of these important things that just like, if the government can't keep people off the road that are not supposed to be driving on the roads, or people out of our country that shouldn't be here legally or doing in reality.
Yeah. Well, it's like what you said, it's common sense.
And, people are going to say, well, that's hateful. You just don't like immigrants. No, some of my favorite people in this country are immigrants who have come to America legally. And so it's not that I'm anti-immigrants. It's more or less, I'm common sense. Like, I want to protect my kids. I want to protect our kids in our community. And we can't do that if we don't know what's going on. And that's what's just the biggest mind-boggling thing in this entire situation. I mean, we saw it in the State of the Union address last week where President Trump was like, I want to put Americans first and those that are in America that are taxpayers first, right? And if you believe in this statement, please stand up. And you see the entire room standing up, and then it pans over to the Democrat section, and they all continue to sit down. And their hatred for President Trump overrode the entire perspective of, we're here for Americans. We're here to protect Americans, protect the people that are, elected us. And that's what's terrifying, is like we have so much hatred in this country because of one man. And we can't focus on, okay, basic laws like protecting our kids or keeping truck drivers that shouldn't be on the roads from driving, or, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to quickly move along and get, data centers put in Indiana. We're going to quickly put in the Bears Stadium. Like, they get these social projects and they push them in so quickly, but they don't care about the finances of it. But when it comes to like protecting and keeping people safe, like everything goes out the door. They just don't care about it. You know, whether it's the environmental side of things, or if it's protecting the kids or keeping adults from kids. It's like it's common sense, and that's what just blows my mind half the time. Is why aren't we talking about this?
Well, and let's call a spade a spade. President Trump is going to be gone in, what is it, 2.5 years? Am I
Yeah,
doing my math right?
yeah,
So let's not and I don't agree with everything Trump says or does anyway. Like I agree with majority of what he says and does, but by no means is he a perfect man. And he's going to be out of the office in 2.5 years. So let's not make decisions or make judgment calls based on our hatred of one person that might affect us a decade from now, I guess is what
yeah.
I'm trying to say.
And that's where I keep seeing the same phrase on social media lately, and it's like, you know, one of the constant prayers that my wife and I have is Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? And what makes me laugh sometimes is I sit back and we talked about earlier, kind of like the hate on social media, right? And one of the things I keep seeing on social media lately is, you're trying to seek approval from a world that crucified the only perfect man.
That's good.
And I was just like, never thought about it that way, but like, yes, 100%. Once you start to get that realization of like, okay, they're going to crucify us, and because they crucified Christ, and it really kind of brings you back to the reality of, okay, this is why we need to go out and fight today. Some people are saying like, oh, you're too young, you shouldn't be running for office. You're inexperienced, you should become like a town councilman or a county councilman and then run for state office. I'm like, okay, that sounds good and all, but like the fight's today. The fight's now. And like I can't do it alone, right? I'm not an expert in anything, and that's where there's such oftentimes this idea that like there's gonna be a perfect person running for office. I'm not perfect. I can guarantee you that much. There's probably gonna be things that I probably do wrong or say wrong. I mean, I just ask that, God fills me with the Holy Spirit as I make the decisions, and, and as we run for office that, even if we don't win, right, which I'm confident that God's already opened those doors, that we're going to win office. We're going to win the primary, we're going to win the general, and we're going to be a senator next year, which is crazy to think about. For me, like I told my wife, when we were thinking about all this, I'm like, if we can bring one person, just one person to know Christ and to get them to accept God and to go to heaven, this entire thing, all these countless hours, all these doors knocked, these steps of, the late night stresses, waking up in the middle of the night and being like, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. I mean, you should see I have a giant calendar printed off with like everything we need to get going and the timelines, and I'm like, and then you throw the kids' schedule and like a work schedule on it. Like, I'm already starting to get grays coming in, and I'm like, all right, God, like, let it all be for your honor, for your glory. Like that, this is all that I ask is like, let it be abundant, that it's not ever been about Trevor, but about you, Lord. Like, if it's your calling and your will, make it happen. We're not looking for an easy battle, because there's no such thing as an easy battle. We're going to get stabbed. We're going to get shot at. We're going to get punched. Like, that's the reality of the spiritualness of this. And Lord, just give us the strength and the courage to be strong, and to act like a man that is just focused on like, God, your kingdom, your glory.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One last question for you. So it's kind of like a two-parter. So someone's listening to this and they're really feeling the nudge of the Holy Spirit that's saying, all right, I need to get involved. So that's part one. What would you say to that person? And then part two is the person who's sitting here listening and is like, okay, but politics isn't really my thing. Encourage that person that you can be a leader outside of politics, maybe in your church, in your school, your whatever. Not everybody has to take the political route. So that's kind of my two-part closing question for you.
Yeah. So what I would say is, so for that first person that feels that nudge of like, I want to get involved, but I just don't know where to start, please reach out to me. Like, I don't have all the answers, right? But I can help get you connected to the right people, right? One of the big things our team at Public Square Ministry at Living Stones has been working on for the past 3 years now at this point is a resource guide that helps identify all the local positions in Lake County, whether it's town trustee, school board, town council, county council, township trustees, every single position. It's like a 500-page document. What does it take? Is it paid? Is it, is it volunteer? Is it appointed? Is it elected? What's the roles? What's the map look like? All of that stuff, we can help guide you and direct you into kind of those different things and help you figure out, okay, where are you best suited for, right? We can help get people involved. And I would say for those that, are more of the mind of like, okay, like, I don't think I want to run for office, or I don't feel God calling me to run for office, right? I just remind everyone that there is so much more than just being somebody who's running for office, right? There's so much outside of it. And one of my favorite books since I started running for office that my pastor gave for me was Wayne Grudem's books. It's called Politics According to the Bible. And
that.
I'll send you a copy, Kristen. But it's like this thick. It's a textbook, but basically every issue, it gives you scripture on what God says about it, and it focuses on the main things that are, what does scripture say about it? But one of the things that it also talks about is kind of the different ways for people that, at the end of the day, there's people that are called to run for public office. There's people that are called to support and help out, politically adjacent, whether it's helping out with, like groups like Indiana Family Institute or other groups that are, social activists, right, that are actually helping, push lawmakers to make the right decisions, right? But then you also have people that are there to help out and, are willing to help knock on doors, make phone calls, help with fundraisers, donate their time, their treasure, or their talents, right? There's kind of those three different things of, ways to get involved that maybe, hey, I don't want to do this, right? I don't feel like God called me to do this. There's other ways, And then last but not least is like, one of the things that stuck out to me these past couple of years, right? Micah Beckwith said this once. He said, it's not okay to be a deadbeat dad, so it's not okay to be a deadbeat citizen. So go to your town council meetings, go to your county council meetings, pay attention to what's happening. You can't steward what God has provided to you unless you're actually paying attention, unless you're being involved. And like, that's like the most mind awakening thing is realizing that a bunch of Christians don't actually go out and vote. Like a surprising number. But then when you go on social media, everybody has an opinion, but nobody wants to actually voice their opinion and actually go out and vote. So run, if it's not running for office, help somebody run for office. If it's not, helping somebody run for office, find out a social group that you can help, that you care about, something passionate about, right? Whether it's protecting the unborn with like Lake County Right to Life, or if it's, protecting families and parental issues like with Indiana Family Institute, or if it's just, take dominion over your local community, like get involved, be helpful. There's so many different things that just intersect and kind of dovetail together that I'm probably not articulating well enough, right? But like, there's so much more than just being the person running for office, right? And what I try to, tell people time and time again, if you're an expert in something, please let me know, because I'm not an expert in anything other than insurance, right? And so like, I'm a representative, right? I'm there to represent our community, our constituents. So people, if you're somebody that's, an expert in transportation and logistics or healthcare or in law or, here's basic economies or the building and trades, like I want a group of people that can help, guide me and be the people that help answer questions. Because Otherwise, what ends up happening, politicians get elected and all they hear is lobbyists. And those lobbyists tell you one side of the story, and it's the story that they want you to know. But I hope that someone out there feels that nudge of the Holy Spirit to say, you know what, I need to get involved. There's no right way to get involved other than just making that first step and actually doing it.
Yeah.
And if people want to help out here in Northwest Indiana, I could use tons of help. You and Dave have been so gracious in helping out. If people want to help, first and foremost for my campaign, right, you guys can go to TrevorDV.com, right? And there's a whole bunch of information about me. But first and foremost, prayer is so appreciated, so coveted. It's that spiritual battle. So that constant hedge of protection with prayer is so appreciated. So if people can pray, would greatly appreciate it. If people can help out with their time, their talent, or their treasures, whether it's donating to the campaign or even just sharing the campaign on social media, or if you have the time to actually volunteer and help, every little bit helps. It takes a village to raise kids, but it also takes a village to change kings, and we got to make sure
that's
that
good.
we do that.
I like that. It takes a village to change kings. I really like that a lot.
I mean, you look at King David, he was never by himself. I mean, when he was running from Saul, he got a ragtag bunch of 40 or 50 guys. And then, but he was never by himself. He had Jonathan in his corner, and that's, God gives us community for sure. And God's going to open up doors for people that start to pay attention and start to actually get involved. I guarantee it. God loves irony, and God loves, I always jokingly call it the chef's kiss, right? He loves when he kind of gets to, somebody once told me that, hey, you should run for office someday. And I said, never. That is stupid. I hate our government. I hate politics. I'm never doing that. And here I am running for state senate.
What a sense of humor.
Yes.
Love it. Love it. Well, Trevor, so appreciated. Cannot wait to see what God does with you. And thanks for coming on the Overcomers podcast. And to all the rest of you, like, share, comment, press all the buttons. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you.